Thank you so much, Amy. Wonderful to be here. And it's just amazing how many commonalities we have across different programs. We may call them by different names, but I can see from the descriptions of learning teams that many of these threads are going through, these different cases. So I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about what we do in Pratham. We obviously have slides which describe our work, but having heard Lucy and the GATE program, I'm going to pull out some things that I think will just help to weave this narrative together, better. If you go to the next slide, this is just to explain who we are. The name Pratham means primary or priority. And so we have worked largely over our last 2 decades on primary and pre-primary. We, of course, do a bunch of other things as well. But largely, we work in how do you get children to school? How do you help them to learn well? How can this be done on scale? And with the resources that communities and schools have already. So that's kind of the broad backdrop of who we are. Next slide. We work in 2 ways, and I'll talk about both of those because we seem to use this learning teams approach in both our approaches. Across the different age groups, just to think of it in this way, that the first way in which we work, we call our direct work, where there is a Pratham person interacting with the children and with the communities and with the schools, and usually leading some instructional activity as well. And the other way in which we work is in partnership with governments. And so until quite recently, our direct work was like a laboratory where you actually learned what worked, learned how to create your new teams, refined your methods, did your early measurements. And when you were convinced that this was an effective way to work, you could then take those elements and work with large partners, typically governments, but often with other organizations as well. So our direct work and our partnership work are sort of 2 sides of the same coin, but we feel very strongly in Pratham across the board that we cannot offer people anything unless you are sure about it yourself, and at some level, unless you've done it yourself. A similar approach is being used in some of the work that we are beginning to do in partnership with other countries. And my colleague Devyani Prasad is also here on this call, who maybe during the question answer session can say a little bit about how some of these approaches have moved from India into other countries as well. So moving on to the next slide. Like many of you who've already spoken, we too believe that it takes a whole community to educate a child, and therefore there have to be collaborations at whatever level you work. And I think the COVID time only highlighted all those connections even more, because when the main institution, the school, was closed, all the other pillars around that have been there all along, but perhaps have been in the shadow of the school, all came right into the sunlight. And so we could see that the work that we do, even in our direct programs, both in the community and the school, both were needed. And when one could not operate for some reason, then even more strength came from the other. And then across the board, of course, across home, neighborhood, community, school, government. But I wanted to give you one very clear example, maybe 2 clear examples of what we are calling learning teams in this conversation applied to us. So think about the early childhood work. We have large and growing programs in early childhood. There's a lot of logic about why we work in the early childhood space as well. But one of the main ones being that, if you want to ensure that there is no learning gaps when kids get older, perhaps the best way is to start well and to build a very strong foundation so that there is no chance of a child slipping either out of school or out of the learning net. So in our early childhood programs, in our direct early childhood programs, we think of, imagine the child at the center and the child being scaffolded by 3 very important pillars. One obviously is the instructor, could be in the early childhood center or in the school, because we see this as a continuum going from preschool to the first 2 grades of primary school. So obviously the person inside the school or inside the preschool center is a very important person. An equally important person we see as the young mother. I think parents are important, but in many of our contexts, the fathers are often far away at work. And so the young mother is a key person. She herself in many of our communities is not that old herself. She may be, anywhere between 18 to 22, so quite young herself. And then we see a third person who is like a older sibling to the child, maybe a middle school or a high school or just a college going young person in the community, because we feel often the home and the school needs one more sort of connecting group. And put all of these together, we see that there will be instructional activity that happens in the school, but there are mothers groups by each neighborhood, so that there is a place where young mothers come together, where the instructor can also be part of it. And then there is the young community volunteer. And the reason to construct this kind of scaffolding around the child is we often see that children will move through a school system which may have all kinds of demands on the child, may have curriculum that is often very difficult at that grade level. But if you have this supporting structure, almost several key players around the child's life, almost like a protective ring that can move with the child as the child grows. And we have seen that this bringing the set of characters, it so happens that most of them are female. So it also highlights the importance of the young mother in the growth of this child, often in a social system where the young mother often is perhaps at the lowest of the totem pole. So this is our attempt to create what we hope will be a long run and durable learning community. We've also, in different parts of India where we are trying this, we have added on that unless you are a learner, it's very difficult to create a learning community. So the Pratham full-time person who often supports 10 villages or 20 villages, depending on where they are also often enrolled in an open university early childhood certification course. So that part of what she's doing is, obviously working on the ground, but that she needs to get certified as well as while she's doing this. And when the school teacher or the community volunteer sees this kind of a learning and certification going on, they often want to enroll in the same courses. So we have different levels of courses as well that we attach onto this, because we feel to be a really good teacher, whether you're an instructor or a mother or a volunteer, you need to be a learner as well. And as everyone grows in these communities, we would like this kind of a community to be a kind of a lifelong learning based on the resources that you have. So I guess, I had not thought of this as a learning team. We had thought of this as how do you build a group of people around the child. But I think it fits quite well into this learning teams idea that we've been talking about. If we move to the next slide, we've put down, a whole bunch of things that we do across our programs. But I want to also take a moment to talk about how in the government partnership work, how we feel that this idea of learning teams is absolutely integral and core to the way we work. And there, the example I will use from our approach to helping children who are already in, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade or above, who still don't have foundational learning. And the instructional methodology or the pedagogical approach that we use is called teaching at the right level, TARL for short. And that is used both in India and in several other countries right now. But imagine that you want to use this approach, and I'll explain what it is, but in a very large school system. So recently we carried out a program jointly with one of our biggest states in India. It's a state which has about 120,000 primary schools. And you want this teaching at the right level, which we feel is a very effective approach to be used by every single school in such a large system. So how do you go about doing that? So a couple of things. One is the state has 75 districts. And as we embarked on the plan, we felt that the first thing to do is to create a team at the district level. So the government selected 4 people, and it was up to the government to select which 4 people they thought. All we said is, if they are district leaders, and each district may have anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 schools, pick a teacher, pick a person who you feel is capable of being a leader like this. And so we had a whole bunch of people. Some were faculty from the teacher training colleges. Some were actually a teacher themselves. So it was a combination of people from the government system. And we added 2 Pratham people to this district level team. Now, in addition to working like teams, we also believe in something that we call leaders of practice, that you can't really train anybody else, you can't orient anybody else until you yourself have done what is required, what you are going to require other people to do. I guess, this is not a new approach. You call it mentoring in some places, be the change that you want to be, and so on. And so each of these people, that was about 300 people, went off and used the teaching at the right level approach for about 20 days in their own schools. And the reason for doing 20 days is also important, because during that time, you can see that in 20 days time, if you start at the level of the child, then you're able to actually get quite a bit of progress. And so in front of your own eyes, you begin to have the belief that I am able to bring about this change. You don't do it alone. We had 2 of these people in each school do it together. And you need to do it together because you're going to move away from what I think Carol was talking about, this age grade construction of schools. If you move away from that and you say that in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, let me look at kids who are still struggling to read words or letters, those who are able to read sentences, but not longer level text. And so across, if you think of the school as organized by rows, by age and grade, and think of columns as different levels of reading, then we had to mix up the 3rd, 4th, 5th grades, pick out the children at the similar levels, reallocate the teachers from being in rows into being in charge of columns. And then when you do this, you find that if you start at the level of the child, kids move from one level to the next very quickly. And so in 20 days time, they may have jumped 2 levels so that there's really nobody left at the lower level. So this requires a team structure, both at the school level, children as teams, teachers as teams. But to support so many schools, you actually require a team that is working together to get this done. So every one of these people who had a successful practice period, we consider a leader of practice. And then they would do the same thing to the layer below them. And eventually these 120,000 schools were steered, guided, supported, and helped by about 4,000 people. And this entire thing, if you think of it, was teams at different levels working together. When we were doing this, we were very focused about this creating of leaders of practice. But as I see it, it's leaders of practice working as learning teams. And the 2 together, we saw in a period of about 2 months, a good, strong 20 percentage point improvement in what children were able to do. So very quickly, moving on to the next slide, this is to show you that, I've already spoken about this, that we always do things both in the school, in the community, whether we are doing it directly ourselves or with, the kinds of teams I've been talking about. During the COVID school closure time, we do this annual status of education report, the ASER survey. We've been doing it for 15 years. It's now done in many other countries as well. And this time we asked who helps whom at home. And you can see that even at home, there are teams at work, whether it's siblings, whether it's mothers or fathers. People were during this time engaging with children to help them to go ahead. So all in all, I don't want to take up any more time. If we just go to the last, I think it's the last slide, that, in trying to summarize how do teams work together, I think that, you have to include people as part of the pathway going towards a solution. But in that pathway, we have learned that if you don't understand the problem, you can't come up with a solution. And to bring people, whether it is parents, whether it is other teachers along, you have to use very simple tools and methods that helps you engage, see the problem for yourself, and then together talk about what solutions can be. Our leaders of practice that I spoke about, I think you have to build the belief and the first-hand experience that substantial change is possible in a short period of time, because many of our people have been stuck in very low equilibrium systems. And so this leaders of practice and the fact that you're not alone, you're working in a team. And overall, I think building participation and ownership is a key part of bringing about any kind of change. And so I think the last point I'll say is, we think teaching at the right level is a very effective way to help children come out of their sort of the low level in which they are stuck. And to do that, you have to be able to reach out to many people at their own level and bring them to be part of a team. So I think that's it from us here in Pratham. Just want to make sure I haven't left any slides out. People have worked hard on these slides. But over to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Rukmini. You brought out two really key points about learning teams there. One, that they really need to happen at every level in the system. So school level, district level, and even state and national level. It's really key. And then the second one being that it's not just about the learning of children, it's about the learning of all of those within the team, and that they should be able to support the goal of lifelong learning. So thank you so much for sharing that.